Hi, this is Michael Bean. I've been a film and acting TV teacher for the last 20 years. This is your free lesson for myfreeactingclass.com for Monday, May the 9th. Today we are talking about character again. I'm going to show you some self-tapes and I'm going to give you a couple of concrete examples. So the quick sort of recap, and wanted to expound on some of what came up in last week's character lesson. So our foundation is that acting, you can only be hired for something that you can make look, quote unquote, real. Right now, we've talked at length about how that means real for the style of the show. You can go back and watch the lesson from a few weeks ago on style. You can find it on the YouTube channel. Hey, that's a good idea. Why don't we show you where to find that, so that you know how to find us. If you go to myfreeactingclass.com, that will give you a variety of options, including the link for today's lesson. And I will also link you to our video archive. You can also find the YouTube channel. So if you want to find out more, all you got to do is go to myfreeactingclass.com. You'll get this little pop-up, and if you do, then I will send you video from the most recent class along with the link. You can just click right here. The lessons are 5 to 6 p.m. PST, which is UTC -7 for the folks who are in Europe, like Alex, who sent a couple of questions today. You can find the link right here, info@myfreeactingclass.com, if you want to submit self-tapes, which again, I'm going to show you a student submitted self-tape today. If you're like, hey, where would I find this lesson on story that you did or style that you did recently? You would click on the video archive. That would take you here. You would click right up here on the YouTube channel. It would take you there. And there it is. What is the style? 5 keys to kick-ass self-tapes, part 2. Also, here you can search for whatever you want, style. You can see what, right? Style story, blah, 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 how to figure out the style of the show, 5 keys to et cetera, et cetera. So multiple lessons if you wanted that a couple of different ways. So for film and TV acting, you can only be hired for the thing that you can make look real on camera. And what that means typically is that you're only going to be hired for the thing that you can make look effortless. Right? If the audience sees you efforting, if they see you, oh, this is who you are trying to be, then while it might be very creatively interesting, it also is likely to seem like performance art, or like amateur acting, or like theater. Or like, oh, I see who you're trying to be. Hi, Donda. Nice to see you. And so with that in mind, let's talk about where do characters come from? And I think that they come in large part from our reading of a story. Here's what we want the character to be. Here's who they seem to be on the outside. And if we break down where characters come from internally, I think what we notice is that we ourselves highly influenced by context, right? So the way that I am when I'm talking to you two is going to be very different from the way that I speak to a bunch of teenagers. If I'm teaching a class of teenagers, it's going to be very different than I talk if I'm if I'm pulled over by a police officer and I think I've done something wrong. It's going to be very different, et cetera, et cetera. So that's in each of those situations, I seem very, very different. And if we just show a little clip of me in that situation, I'm going to seem very different. Now, actors and artists tend to get very excited about how much fluidity there is in the essence of who they are. They're like, well, I am vast and I contain multitudes, right? I know all of these parts of myself. Like even the parts that I don't show anybody, I'm aware of them inside of myself, and I can bring those to characters. Right. So if I have this essence that is like very mutable, very influenced by context, that's this like sort of essence of who I am. Only some of those pieces are going to be practiced enough that you can perform them with ease in your body Yeah, and that's really what effortless feels like. Effortless feels like. He had a great question from a student in my adult class last week. So after this lesson, taught this lesson, took the ideas there, and one of them said, "Well, what does that mean? Effortless, ease. Like, what does that? How do we quantify that? Like, how basically how would I know?" And like it definitely is tricky. It's one of those things that you will never have sort of perfect control over, because you don't know what is going to like look completely effortless to those producers, what's going to make that particular set of people say, oh yeah, that's just who Duke is as a person. Where what you can focus on is ease. Are you seeing yourself efforting to show some part of the character? Can you hear, oh, I'm doing that thing with my voice, or does it just sound like you talking? Right? Can you say, oh, like that's, I can see what I'm doing there to try and show the feeling, or does it look like you're just feeling something? And yes, it might take time to make those distinctions. And if you're not used to it, an exercise that I've recommended in previous lessons is search your archive and find video that was taken ideally without you being aware of it, right? Some friend just like took a video clip of you so that you can compare. So you have a baseline to be like, oh yeah, that's just me talking, right? That's what I look like when I'm not efforting at all, when I'm not trying to present for a camera. That's what my voice sounds like. That's what how my body moves. That's how relaxed my face is. Yeah. And it is, I think, one of the reasons why it is important, to be doing some kind of regular practice, so you can get that feeling of ease in your body while you are doing this fairly sophisticated technical thing of, I'm going to stand in this place, I'm going to say lines that aren't mine, I'm going to be thinking about my eye lines, all of that you want to be rehearsed in enough that you are not thinking about it. So I think strongly, strongly influential in this idea of ease is, have you put in the practice such that you can do the technical things without them taking a lot of your brain space? Right. That seems so simple, but I think a lot of actors just don't ever get to the point where that stuff is rehearsed in enough that it can operate in the background, that it can take 5% of their attention or 10% of their attention, and most of their attention can be available for, I'm now pretending I'm in this scene and it's really happening. It's a little bit like if you were uh, if you're playing a musical instrument, then you might drill fingering over and over and over again, so that or learn a particular complex piece of music, in a technical way by playing it over and over again, so that when you were in performance, you could let that happen, and then the bulk of your attention could be on the interpretation of it, could be on the creative artistic side of it. And it takes time to get there, and you certainly don't have to do it all at once. But I think that it's strongly influential. That's my opinion of sort of how you get there is practice. One of my other adult students, when reflecting on what does ease feel like, what does effortless feel like, Mike said, well, the first time I booked something professionally, I just convinced myself, looking at the character, that, oh yeah, like I'm just like that. I don't have to act. I just have to show up. And and that was the first thing that I booked. I thought that was like a really useful, influential story, because certainly that's the way we want the producers to experience you, right? Oh, I don't have to, I don't have to act. Like I just have to show up, right? That you want the producers to be like, oh yeah, that's not Donda trying to do anything. That's just like, that's just who they are, right? And that's the game of it, right? Is to give them these glimpses of you, that are influenced by wardrobe, that are influenced by the circumstances of the script, you know, such that you end up with very different, this is me opinions. Uh, Let me see if I can find, yeah, let's look at James's self-tape. Yeah, excellent. Right, so today we're going to use James as an example, because we have a self-tape of his that we didn't get to review. And then if we've got time, then I can use myself as an example as well. So something that I think is worth thinking about, is okay, here's this like, there's this essence of who you are, right? Like, and it's very flexible based on like who you're with, where you are, what your circumstances are, how you're feeling on that day, your life experience, all that. There's your essence as a person. Then there's your social persona, who you're used to being most of the time with people, right? Now, initially, if when folks have not taken much acting class or done much acting practice, usually there are still characters, a few of them that are so close to their social persona, that with the appropriate, coaching or with the appropriate practice, they can come across as very, very believable because it's something they're just very used to doing, right? They're like, oh yeah, this does look effortless because really, at least in some contexts, this is who you are, or, even if that's like, a Nickelodeon show, and this is somebody who's just like been a goof, with his friends, for 1,000 hours beforehand, right? So you give him a character who's a goof, he's like, oh, this is real inside the context of this. I believe it. It seems like the actor has done a lot of work, and in a way they have done a lot of practice with that particular character. Yeah, and then there. I think that what happens is actors do, artists do, certainly I have many times in my career gotten excited about characters that are vastly outside of my social persona. Like what's really exciting for me as an artist is, oh, here's something that I don't see myself as at all. Right. So here's the way that I behave normally. Here's what the way I'm used to being seen, but here's a character that's wildly different. That's what I'm excited about. And I see students get excited about that a lot. Right? They're like, oh, I'm gonna like do this crazy accent. I'm gonna do this thing that's like screaming or crying, or it has something that's like wildly outside of myself. Then that's what excites me as an artist. That's what fires me up. And as long as you're doing those things uh, as cross training, or to stretch yourself, or as practice, and you don't get confused and think that that's the thing you're going to be hired for, then that's fine. Like I think that it's important to feed yourself as an artist. But in terms of practicing and choosing what you're going to practice with, I think that if you wanted to work right away, and this is what talent agents will usually say, they'll make a quick assessment on what you look like and sound like and say, okay, here's how you're probably, we're going to submit you. Here's the kinds of roles we're going to send you in for. So make sure that you can do those kind of roles, right? So it's like, I've got my essence as a person, I've got my social persona, and then there's, what I can be paid for, mostly based on what I look and sound like. Yeah. And what you'll typically find is that initially, what people get hired for strongly influenced by what they look and sound like. Why? Because if I'm a producer and I'm making those casting decisions, right? Remember, producers in charge of the money, so they make the final decisions about who gets cast. If I'm a producer and I'm making those casting decisions, well, my first impression, whether or not that's accurate, of, oh, this is just what this person is actually like, going to be highly influenced by what somebody looks and sounds like. Like, will that also, carry, come along with like a whole set of cultural stereotypes that I grew up with? Absolutely. Right. So that's influenced not just by like my own idiosyncratic sense of what somebody looks and sounds like, but also every TV show or movie that I've watched, previous. And so, that's why talent agents can make that best guess. They're like, well, here's what I normally see. Right. If you are like the skinny white guy with the glasses and the receding hairline, okay, you better make sure that you know how to play like the teacher and the like tech nerd and the something else, right? Right, if you're the bald white guy, then like especially with glasses, I've got these great little round gold glasses. Doctors, scientists, the occasional lawyer. Now is that because that's like a deep part of my essence as a person, to be a doctor, a scientist, or a lawyer? Well, I would say that my social persona, right? So essence as a person, my social persona, definitely has an element of like being intellectual. I love that. It's influential in me being a teacher, going like, ooh, ideas, and I just want to pull them all apart. So it's something that's very, very familiar for me. And so then people are like, that guy with the glasses, doctor or scientist. Okay. Like that's something that is familiar enough to me that when I go in, people have this experience of, oh, yeah, that guy probably is like that. Right. So that there's an example, in my own career, between like, what can I be paid for, strongly influenced by what I look and sound like, but ultimately comes down to what can I make look real, right? So people often ask, they like, I just see this as oversimplified for lessons a lot, right? And if we really come back to what can you make look real to people, then that explains why sometimes people do get cast for something that is different than the way they look and sound. It's just rare. If we come back or I keep coming back to the advice of one of my teachers, Larry Moss, who's just said, just be so good they can't afford not to hire you, which I think is a really excellent aspiration, right? Like, is it something you can control? No, but it's about as close as we get. Right? Like I can focus on just becoming so skilled, and exploring so many characters and getting so familiar with so many aspects of myself, that when I bring those characters to life, they're like, oh, wow. Okay, we weren't thinking about the bald white guy for that, but actually, that is an interesting option now that we see how alive and interesting it is, right? So that is a possible thing that you can pull off. Yeah, and I think that if you look at the careers of like a lot of folks, you'll see that initially, especially in smaller roles, they're going to get cast based on how they look and sound, right? And then as they accumulate more credits, then especially if they accumulate the kinds of credits that their agents can really leverage, right? So as soon as Donda's got the lead in his own TV show, right, and people are used to seeing his face on billboards, or on the sides of buses, then his agent, can call folks and say like, hey, he really wants to play this character that is wildly different than him. Like, I know everybody's used to seeing him as, the like special operations something something something, but like now he wants to play the like overwhelmed single dad in the something something, like wildly different character, like definitely doesn't look like that, definitely doesn't sound like that, but of course, like as an if his essence as a person can pull that off, then his agent can say, yeah, you should see him for that, even though he doesn't look and sound like that, right? And so that's one of those things where the folks who pull that off either have such huge credits, that they're essentially being purchased for a project based on their recognition value. It's like, oh, Don's in this, okay, well, I'll see it, doesn't matter. Or because they are pulling off that thing of being so good, being so skilled, that it does not matter, that they don't sort of fit somebody's idea of what a character like that should look and sound like. Right. So if we come back to that idea of like, okay, great, I want that to be me. I want to be so skilled that I'm experienced by decision makers, as somebody who can do that kind of thing. Then this idea of what can I make seem effortless. And I think that the way that I approached this in last week's lesson, I went into more detail. But there's a fantastic quote by a guy named Sanford Meisner: acting is being truthful under imaginary circumstances. And so for me, character comes first from this external assessment. Oh, this character is nice. This character is mean. This character, is a jerk. This character, is nurturing. This is the way that I would describe them from the outside. And then the trick is, okay, if this is true, that my essence as a person is so flexible, even I would behave this way under some circumstances. How can I imagine myself into those? And so character, is less about externals. At least if we want it to seem effortless, it's less about what do I want it to look and sound like. Of course, it starts there. Of course, it starts there. Reading any kind of story starts there, but it is more about, okay, how do I imagine myself into circumstances where I actually would behave that way? Because if I can pull that off, because it's true that even I would behave that way in those circumstances, that's when maybe I get the experience of people saying, oh, yeah, wow, that guy just is like that. And they don't have to know that the scene where like I'm supposed to be actively full of contempt. Now, contempt, I don't know, I experienced the feeling, but like it's not something that I move through in my life a lot. Right. But maybe in order to play a scene with contempt, I have to make the person I'm talking to terrible person. Like I have to find, something about them that is like truly objectionable. Like they are like this violent abuser of people. And so I'm like, oh yeah, no, this person, like I can really find that. Like, how could you do that? And in the story on the paper, it's like the reason for my contempt is something trivial or something that I personally don't agree with values wise. Right. Like, again, I'm a bald white guy. So these days, like I would say half my characters, like I'm the face of patriarchy right here. It's like, yeah, I'm like, I get to play the oppressor, and I'm like, okay, well, like I don't feel a lot of contempt, for folks, who have like different identities, but like I absolutely am interested in sort of being the bad guy in that story as a way of sort of reinforcing the social idea, that this is wrong. We're like, oh, yeah, I'll tell that story. I'll be the person who's like doing the thing so that you can be like, oh my God, what is that guy doing? That's wrong. Okay, yeah, I'll play that story. But that means that like for about half of my auditions these days, I am having to, um, do that sort of like mental arithmetic of like, okay, how do I find contempt? How do I find disapproval? How do I find like this person is wrong because of what they're doing? I had a couple of auditions last week for like the like bishop in an Amish community, who was like super controlling and like manipulative, and then it's like the Amish dad, who like beats his daughter to like try and get her to behave, and I'm like, okay, wow, really not my style, but like how do I find those, and truly it's the kind of thing that um, if you have not got that practice in your body, that imagination practice in your body, like how do I embody different circumstances, then it is going to be very effortful. And the likelihood that you would be booked from something that you experience is very effortful is just fairly low. So when I'm coaching somebody, right, so basically if you find yourself in that situation, just like get coaching for that audition, right? Like that's probably not one you can pull off on your own, but maybe it's something that you can be scaffolded into with support. Maybe somebody else can be like, try this, try this. Yeah, actually, might not know this, but when you just pretend you're talking to your 5-year-old niece, like this scene totally works, and you seem really like the patriarchal, condescending, like men are better than everybody, and only that you're just talking the way you would to a small child, which of course if you talk to an adult that way, it's going to seem condescending and terrible. So maybe don't know those places in yourself yet, but that's where I think it would be appropriate to get coaching and support. Now, Duke said about practicing monologues as your characters. Is practicing monologues and character, is it a good and useful practice? I think so. And it really depends what you mean. Is if there's a specific dialect, like voice dialect that you are trying to master to the point where you can like speak that way and have people go, oh, that's just how Duke talks. Is it useful to always have a monologue on the go in that dialect? Absolutely. Like, is it useful to periodically take 24 hours or a week and then and just literally actually speak to everyone, all the time in that dialect? Yeah, absolutely. Right. The folks I know who've put the energy in to do what's called standard American, will often do that. They're like, oh yeah, like I spent, a week, I spent 6 months, just doing standard American, and for the first this long, it didn't feel real. I've only done that once. I once spent 2 weeks, in the British accent that I needed for a theater piece, and spent several days hanging out with a friend from the UK. And it was super cringy for me at the beginning because James actually has an accent from the UK, and he was very clear that people, especially in South London, would just like absolutely not have it the way that I was talking. So the whole 2 weeks, I was just waiting for somebody to call me out. But the truth is, almost nobody noticed. Right. And eventually I internalized it in my body enough, that when I dropped the accent, some of the people in my acting class were surprised, and it was very validating. Uh, the so in terms of like practicing character, sure, I would say like, and aside from that, if we're taking my lens on character, then when you say practicing monologues in character, do you mean a specific, like, here's what I want it to look like? Or is there a specific feeling that you want to play with, right? Because if it's a specific feeling you want to play with, well, then you can ladder yourself in. And is that good to practice? I mean, I would say that's what monologues are for. Monologues are for you to work out your instrument, right? So you're like, oh, here's a monologue where the story speaks to me in some way, and the feeling, the feeling arc in the scene or the story that's being told is something that's like a little bit of a stretch for me in a way that's interesting. Yeah, that's what practice is for. Absolutely. Now, yeah, and if you mean like that sort of traditional or theatrical sense of like, I'm going to put on a different way of walking and a different way of being, and I'm going to practice different facial tics. Is it possible that actors can do those? Yes. And I think that when they do, it's newsworthy, it's noteworthy, it's interesting. And the folks who can pull that off and have it seem very real are either extremely practiced. They've read tens of thousands of hours of practice that you haven't seen, and or they are willing to put in an enormous amount of time practicing that character until it looks and sounds and feels effortless, and then they're going to show it to people. And either way, neither of those are going to work for an audition. Right. So I would say that until you have got some of the foundations, of like, well, I can bring a range of like feeling experiences, to my work, and have all that be believable. That any of that external work, which is sort of like a fun cross training, I would say is probably not something you're going to see results from right away in terms of work. Now, does that make it not useful practice? No, like literally anything that keeps you pleased as an artist is worth doing. If you're like, yeah, but I just love it. Okay, great. Right? Just accept that might have a longer arc to it. Right? If you're like, I want to tell the story of somebody who's, got a particular like physical condition I don't have. Right. Like I want to practice, telling stories, where that like really involve like, some kind of physical trait. And so I'm going to, like I'm going to do Richard III. Right. And, that means that like, this shoulder and this arm's crippled and there's the limp, and I'm going to practice, those monologues from Richard III over and over and over again until I can tell that story convincingly on camera. Sure. Great. If that is outside your current practice, it's just going to take a lot more time. And certainly if you get an audition tomorrow or next week, that like are you going to be able to make that real? No, probably not. But if you've put in like an enormous amount of time with Richard III, but if you were a Shakespearean actor who got cast as Richard III, and had to spend hundreds and hundreds of hours in rehearsal and then hundreds and hundreds of hours on stage, well then yeah, are that actor, because they've put in the practice, because it's part of their what they now have enough practice in to make look effortless. Are they going to be able to do that for a character tomorrow? Yeah, of course. They'll be able to put that on right away, and everybody else will be like, "Wow, oh, talent!" That's just practice, right? Like talent is practice that we don't see. And so which is both I think enormously reassuring and also a pain in the ass, because like who wants to do tons and tons and tons of practice? Like, is anybody really like hungry to do all that extra practice? I don't know about that. And that's why you got to like still feed your soul and do the kind of practice that you will genuinely enjoy, and not just like hyper focus on only the thing that you're going to be immediately paid for. Right, because you got to stay in the game long enough, to get skilled. So I do think it is important, to both like stretch in ways that are artistically interesting to you and put in some time and energy, trying to um, learn how to tell the stories, that are in line with what people are going to guess or um, what's the right word, project, the assume based on how you look and sound. But incidentally, and I've done this, I've talked about this at length in other lessons. Uh, Once you get a film and TV talent agent, they're basically the best person to guess about that. But acting teachers will often um, give you their opinion, and actors will often give you their opinion. I'm not saying those don't have utility. It's just that the only people who are interacting with the actual market enough to have a real sense of what are those stereotypes and how are they shifting, and how does like your face and look line up with what people might buy. The only people who have that actual feedback from the market are talent agents, because they're professional marketers of actors. They have their roster of actors. They're sending out pictures to people all the time. They're seeing who gets chosen for auditions, who gets booked. Right. So talent and casting directors, because they're the ones seeing people come in. So they're seeing even more of those pictures. As an actor, you're going to have more access to somebody who's a talent agent. My advice is go to your agent, or once you find an agent, really look to them for advice, on how do you think that I can be cast. I still think that it's useful to ask acting teachers, to ask your friends, to ask other actors, but in that case, you want to look for patterns that emerge rather than take any one person's opinion as, oh, that is gospel. They're not marketing people for a living. They're not seeing thousands of different, headshots and faces and seeing, who gets picked and who doesn't. So they're going to have strong opinions, but you want to see what emerges as a pattern. And I did a whole lesson about this last year before. But one actually fun way to sort of hack that is, what do people who don't know me in life assume about me? And it's usually like, why do people always assume I'm bleh? Like whatever that is, that's often the thing to take advantage of. Because guess what? People who don't know you include producers. And they're going to be like, oh yeah, that guy's just so, like whatever that is, can you learn to do characters like that and take advantage of them? Because if you can lean into characters like that, then you can take advantage of the assumptions that people might make anyway. And that sometimes, is a way to take advantage of that system, right? So that, right, essence is a person. What right, what have I practiced so much, that I can do it effortlessly, and then what am I going to be paid for? Sometimes, you can get those things to line up that way. All right, I have a couple of questions from Alex, and so I'm just going to read those out, because Alex, is in Europe, and is not always able to attend in person, and it's I love the fact that we've got. So here we are. He said, in one of your recent videos, you said the casting director can tell if you're a good fit for the role in the first 15 to 20 seconds and from the thumbnail. And as you said, most of the casting sites use the first second of the self-tape as the thumbnail. My question is, how can I make an interesting thumbnail for my self-tape if I don't have anything interesting to do in the first second of the self-tape? I know that even when you have nothing to say, you still have to think. And then, right. So he added some more detail. He said, it's a long question, but the idea is, how can I catch the casting director's eye so they click on my self-tape? And so this is like a classic actor question, right? Like, how can I game the system so that I grab people's attention, and the closest I've got there, Alex, is what you can do is you can make sure that you you just actually show off your personality in some way in the first second of your self-tape. And that can be as simple as just like make sure they see your face. Right? I think if you try to do something interesting, that is a sure way to be experienced as working too hard. Right? If the beginning of every self-tape is you like, hey, you got a leg up, you're jumping in. Ooh, there's he got his hands into don't worry about it. They're not choosing the most expressive or amazing thumbnail. The reason that you want the thumbnail, is because you want them to watch the tape and then be like, oh yeah, that person who did the cool thing. I'm seeing Duke's face in that first frame, and that reminds me of the tape that I watched. So that's for the thumbnail. So I guess what I'm saying is, it is an interesting question that there's absolutely no way to learn the answer, and you run a very strong risk by trying to be interesting of being experienced by other people as working too hard, which is like the first thing that will make them disqualify you. So hopefully that makes sense. As for the first 15-20 seconds, what can you do in there that's interesting? Again, you don't want to be experienced as being as efforting in some way. So I would say that that's where your best bet in terms of like being interesting is really making clear choices about the story you're telling. Right? Go back to that 5-part series on kick-ass self-tapes and really go through there. If you don't have a system for yourself of making decisions about a script, then that 5-part story style, relationships, changes, want, like that's as good as any, as a starting place. But making sure that you have some kind of system so that you go through and you're not missing anything in the story, and so that you are finding ways to make those choices that's in line with who you are. And if they see who you are, if they see some part of your essence as a person, in a strong way in that tape, then even if you're not right for this character, they're like, oh, okay, right? It was right. We experienced it as being skilled enough that it wasn't effortful. We get a sense of who this person is, and we can see what they look and sound like. Now we know what to bring them in for next time. Right? The risk is that if you're trying to be interesting on purpose, as opposed to just trying to do skilled acting and tell the story to the best of your ability, that they're like, oh, I see what he's doing. Like he tried to do this interesting thing. And casting directors have lots of stories about that, right? Casting directors, if you get them alone, will be like, oh yeah, and this one time, this guy just insisted on putting this backflip in the middle of his scene. It had nothing to do with the scene. I have no idea why the backflip, except that he was real proud of his backflip, so he showed it off. Right? Right, that I'm very interesting. But the reason it stuck in the casting director's mind is because they were like, wow, this guy clearly doesn't know how to act, and so he put in the backflip because he could do that. Right. So just right. Your best bet, in my opinion, is still be so good that they can't afford not to hire you. Not something you have control over, but that's as close as we got. And so just see if you can keep making it alive, interesting story choices that show off some part of like who you are as a person, that tell the story in a clear way, that does not seem like you are trying hard, but just that you are that character in the scene. Right. And if that means that you're at the point in your own practice where you're like, gosh, I can get this looking and sounding really honest, but I don't yet have the skill to like bring in like a sort of really big emotional range. Well, if you're practicing, practice something with bigger emotional range. If you're submitting a self-tape for a professional audition, submit the thing that looks really honest, and just be real with yourself about like, yeah, I would love to cry here where it says cry, in the scene, but right now, when I do that, and this is where you don't have to decide for yourself, right? Get a coach, get somebody else to look at it, or get somebody who's got lots of experience looking at these tapes to look at it. So that they're like, you know what? I just see you trying to be sad. That doesn't do anything for me. Right. So, and I've done this with actors, where I'm like, okay, look, the moment where it says that he cries, what I want you to do is just look away. Right. Like if you're not there yet, like if you don't own that in yourself, if you haven't practiced it enough to tell that story, then you can do it without efforting. And there are ways to do that. Just like, okay, I've got the scene and I've got I'm going to come back. And is it a little bit of a cheat? Yeah. Like, do people know that? Sure. But if you look just right for this part and it doesn't seem effortful and you're telling the story, they can still hire you. And so just make sure that you know what this tape is for. If this tape for people to decide whether or not they want to buy your face for their movie, then you really put your attention on like, we don't want them to see the effort. Is this for practice so that you can stretch and grow? Fine. Yeah, see the effort. Right? If you're an athlete and you're doing the kind of thing that stretches you and makes you grow, it doesn't matter how many times you fall over as long as you don't hurt yourself. right? As long as it stretches you and makes you grow, right? Like if you are in competition, you don't want to fall over. Right. And it's, like acting isn't exactly a competition because because it's more complex. That there's a creative element of like they're going to choose somebody who they feel wants to tell the story. It's not like the best actor gets the role. And anytime we get to glimpse behind the scenes in casting, it's really like it's such a strange um, the mind shift to realize that like not only does the best actor not get the role, but very often the best actors get disqualified in the first round because they just something about them doesn't fit the story they want to tell. You're like, wow, that person's an amazing actor, but they're what they're bringing to this is too much darkness for this character. Or that person's an amazing actor, but like he's got the bushy eyebrows, and like this, and the character is supposed to be like super prim and precise, and it just doesn't work. And in theory, could they hire you and trim your eyebrows? Yeah. In practice, will they do that? No, not if they've got 100 tapes to watch and they can just choose one where they're like, yep, all the things line up here. So it's a complex system. I really had intentions to be like, good, I'm just going to talk through it really fast, and then we'll spend a bunch of time watching self-tapes. Didn't happen again. The Dante, if you have questions, feel free to throw them in the chat window. One of the advantages of coming in person, is that if there's something that you want to ask about, you can ask me here instead of needing to send an email. And I just really appreciate folks coming in person because it gives me something to look at when I'm talking. Alex had a second question, and this is like just a super straightforward technical one. And I love those. So he said, my question is, how can you set your eye line in a self-tape for the scene that has the other character right next to your character, basically two characters side by side? And this is a great question, Alex. I'm going to try and remember to cover this the next couple of times I do self-tape technique, but very quickly because the question is here, right? So Alex had a couple of screenshots from actual just things that he pulled offline. So these are the kinds of scenes you see in movies all the time. Walk and talk, they're walking down the hallway, like walk and talk, two guys outside, two people sitting on a bench talking to each other. And if you're in a film scene, well, you just actually set it up that way. You're going to walk down the hallway. They're going to move the camera with you, at least for a piece of it. You don't have to think about how to set it up. For an audition, you cheat the eye line close to camera. So even if the characters are supposed to be completely beside each other, you don't want to see my ear for most of the scene. And so what I do is I'm beside the other person, and I put my eye line here on this side of the camera. We're looking out at the view, and then I cross camera. So I turn across the camera to look at you because then my face is completely open. Remember that thing about being able to see both eyes without them being cut off by the nose at all. And I put that person on the other side of the camera. So I often I have to talk to students because they're like, but it doesn't make sense because they're beside each other. I'm like, it's a really weird car. Like it doesn't matter. Like this is your imagination, people. You get to set the circumstances. Like you're twisted in your seat. All I know is that like you need your eye line to be close to camera both ways. So when you're looking out the windshield and when you're looking at the person beside you, and so that's how you do like characters beside each other. Is you just give it the indication of, right? So you're basically it's like my shoulders are facing one side of the camera, and I'm going to look and talk to the person on the other side of the camera, and that does enough for an audition. Then we get to see your eyes. So Alex, is a great question. Thank you. Okay, we up for one self tape. We can watch James be the assistant to the mafia boss, and then Duke just reminded me that that he also has one, and we'll save that and watch it next week. Yeah. Okay. Perfect. Okay, why am I not seeing this? Come on now. There it is. So interestingly, like in character, this is the tape of James's that we watched, a while back, right? So if we just watch the first 15 seconds.
Here you go. Tell me if you like it, and don't lie. I'll know. Amazing.
Right, so there's the first 4 seconds. Is the casting director going to make some assumptions about like, James and his ability to tell that story, right? Are they going to make some assumptions about like who he is as a person based mostly on what he looks and sounds like, in those first 4 seconds? Yeah, absolutely they are. Wardrobe is influential there, like the shape of his face and the his grooming choices and the fact he's wearing earrings are influential there. The outfit is influential there. If we just watch the first 4 seconds of his other tape, right, immediately you can see that wardrobe, we are seeing a different person. Like, or we see like the grooming's the same, the earrings are the same. But he's giving us a visual indicator, that immediately puts us in a different context. Now, I don't think that like dressing in character, like I don't think you want to go too far. Like I don't know, rent a breastplate to play your Roman centurion. But if you are playing character who's the assistant to a mafia boss, well then yeah, throwing on some kind of the suit jacket, especially when you're only seeing it head and shoulders, like $2 at a thrift store and you can find something that looks good only on the shoulders, and fits your chest, like but it doesn't have to be something that you would wear to a fancy dress party. It just has to be something, that looks appropriate on camera. So one more part of like, sort of cheating for the camera. Wardrobe can be significant there. Right, so that's that, like, okay, oh right, like I know my essence as a person, fits both of these. I'm going to help tell the story, by going like, let me give you a visual indicator, that I am this character. Donda, thank you so much for that question. Can you, while I'm just talking about James here, clarify what you mean, by what to focus on? Do you mean like what is the first thing to practice? Do you mean what kind of training am I going is useful to start with? Do you mean what kind of characters based on looking at your face do I think you might be cast for and might be useful to practice? Do you mean something else? And so when I know your question, but let me finish watching a little clip of James, and then I'll pin you and we can chat with you live in the lesson.
That's a lot of green for ringing the doorbell and picking up some Benjamin and rocks.
So what we're gonna do to her after we're done grabbing?
Whoa! I did not sign up for no heavy shit like that. I'm cutting out.
No one's cutting out. You're driving. What? You're gonna let a woman tow your 62 Cherry? It ain't got a scratch on it.
Man, fuck his car.
Oops. Okay, this is why I should review these tapes before looking at them. So if we just look at these first 20 seconds, what we're seeing is that like here he's playing a gangster. Oh, that's a lot of greens. You're talking about the money. Now this is something that I think especially people of color, persons of color who are actors, have a decision they have to make for themselves. Like the world of film and TV is definitely like gradually shifting, but I think that that especially Black men are still disproportionately going to be asked to play criminals. And so is that something that like you want to take people's in the same way that basically do you have the opinion of like hell no, like are you of the opinion of like I will take your money world, and then like use that for the betterment of myself and the world, like that's got to be a personal opinion on that. So one of the things that stands out for me watching the first 20 seconds is like, oh right, here's like a young Black man who's been asked to audition as a gangster, like probably like requires speaking to, as we're thinking about like what do people want to buy, do people want to buy things that are in line with stereotypes that often line up with institutional racism? Yeah, absolutely. Like how are you going to orient to that as you step into the industry? Like I think it's worth thinking about. right, that, and so if we go back to the tape, and James, I better review this and see, like, because I do want these lessons to be, open to all ages. So I better review this in more detail, and we can come back and watch it next week. Maybe we'll do like just a pure self-tape review, and next week, because Natalia is going to send us a tape as well, and we've got one from Duke.
That's a lot of green for ringing the doorbell and picking up some Benjamin and rocks.
Right, so visually it looks great. We're in like a medium shot, right? So not a medium close up, which is what you're seeing me in here, but a medium shot. Top of the head down to the belly button, just or waist. We've visually, we're seeing assistant to the mafia boss. Or at least that this is this character is like upscaled or dressed upscale. Most of what I'm seeing in that like first 15-20 seconds is about like, does it seem like he's efforting? And I would say that right now it does. It sounds to me like he's efforting, which works for the first line, because maybe the character is supposed to be nervous, like, wow, okay, they like, look at this, diamonds or guns or whatever it is, Benjamin and rocks, says. So I assume that like he's talking about a whole bunch of cash, and the something going on here, but then his voice sort of stays pitched up, and this is something that James knows and is actively working on, and we talked about in the last tape, but in my initial impression, that makes me go, oh wow, like this person definitely, there's a whole bunch of characters that like a young handsome black man who's muscular, who looks like James, like does that fit into like a whole bunch of characters that can be cast currently in film and TV? Yeah, of course, absolutely, right. And looking good is something that like looks like it is important to James. That we saw his headshot, or several of his headshots at the end of his last tape, basically showing off like, look, like, I'm proud of my body, this is what I look like, I'm used to looking good. Right, so that's going to be influential, in the way that he gets cast, because that happens to line up with a lot of the characters, that he's going to be asked to go out for. And he did say that he's being asked to audition for like a really substantial projects. He said this is a Natalie Portman movie. He said that the last one, on the breakdown, said star names preferred. And he's still reading for it. So clearly, him, his agent, casting directors all look at his headshot and are like, dang, that like, this is something that is marketable. And so the place where I think, James, if you're watching this, you're going to get the most mileage is in focusing on how do I come across with as little effort as possible. And I think that he's already on track with that. But for those of you who sort of like that self-tape review,
So what are we gonna do to her after we're done grabbing?
Whoa, I did not sign up for no heavy shit like that.
right? And so there's right, so his voice stays pitched up. There isn't that moment of transition. Right? It's basically got the same emotional tone from the beginning, like wow to like whoa. Without that transition of I'm taking in new information and about like, nah, not going to do it. And so it looks like there's this same emotional opinion, about the very first thing, and then sort of this new information you get from the character. And so, something like that, I think is going to be influential in terms of, folks deciding, oh, okay, here's where this person's skill is at, because it looks or sounds modestly effortful. Great. Let's talk to Donda for 1 minute, and then I will wrap. Hi, Donda. This is his face. Sorry, he didn't know I was going to put him, on camera. And he said, hopefully, if you had different pronouns, you would put them in your the gallery picture. They said, I wanted to know what I should focus on at the beginning of the journey: skills, network connections, agent, branding, or something else. What should a beginner focus on? So I mean, I'm hopelessly biased, right? Like you're asking an acting teacher. And so, like I have my own opinion. I think that you should focus on being skilled enough to meaningfully do the work if you get a shot to do it. Like, do you already have that? Like, sort of, like, do you already have a bunch of that practice in you?
I, am I audible?
Yep.
Uh, so I don't have much practice, but yeah, I do have a little bit of practice and stuff. Yeah.
Right. So I think that initially your best, like, it's a little bit like saying, um, should I focus on trying to get gigs playing the guitar, or should I learn, or should I get good at playing the guitar first?
Hmm.
Right.
Oh
and
yeah.
and so to me that seems like a really easy question. Like I think that at the point, where you have enough skill that you could work professionally, that's when it makes sense to go seeking opportunities to work professionally. And so if you're already there, if you're like, yeah, I could already do small roles, as long as you're being clear with people, about like, yeah, I'm ready to audition for like, a couple of lines in a TV show, then there's nothing that stops you from doing that. You until you are highly skilled, nothing's going to like launch your career in a huge way anyway, right? But if you're like, but what would excite me as a person, is chances to play, and do commercials and do film. There's nothing that stops you from getting a talent agent, right? You get a good headshot, you send it out to local talent agents. There's some lessons in the archive about that. Does that make sense?
Yeah. Oh yes.
Right.
Yes.
And so what should I focus on at the beginning? Skills. Right? Like of your list, I think skills are the most important, because that's the thing, that because even if you happen to have a super marketable face, which, like, I don't know, not my, I don't have enough information to guess like, yes, people are going to want to buy Don's face. But let's say that you did. Like, let's say that you're like, actually, I happen to look like somebody who's like a huge star right now, and you can't tell because of my lighting right now. But like, once I am, you're like, oh wow, yeah, totally. That guy looks like this person who's a huge star. Definitely, people are going to want to buy his face. Um,
Hmm.
if people want to buy your face and you don't have the skill to pull off those auditions in a way that looks effortless, then you're going to blow your shot right at the beginning. Everybody's going to want to see you because they're like, yeah, definitely we want to buy this guy's face. And then the worst case scenario is they remember you as being unskilled and they're like, cool, hey, great face, couldn't act, and they're not going to bother seeing you again.
Hmm.
Right. So a focus on skill, I just don't think you can go wrong with.
All right.
Now, and then ideally you find representation. You find a professional talent agent, who will rep you and at the appropriate level, right? Where you can be clear with them about like, here's the stuff I can pull off. Like I do want to stretch. I'm in class, right? My focus is on my skills. You say to your talent agent, here's what I can do and make look easy or effortless right now. Like, can we get me in for stuff like that? Just because if I get on set, that's going to help build my confidence. That's going to give me a shot at it. Does that answer
Yeah.
your question?
Yeah.
Yeah. And I
Uh,
think thank you for asking. I mean, it's a vulnerable question. And I think it's a really common one. Folks are like, oh my God, I need everything. Like, where do I start? Ah,
hmm.
and I just don't
Confusion.
think you can go wrong by
Yeah.
starting with skills.
I usually become less confident when I go for audition, and even though I've practiced some of my any of my monologue or something like that, I become nervous and I just forget the lines just because I remember. I keep recalling that I don't have to forward my lines.
And
So
so a
that
couple of
makes me nervous. Yeah, that like kind of does not let me show my full potential. Like
a
my
couple
half
of
of my
thoughts there.
energy gets that. Yeah.
The one of which, and I've got to run in just a minute. So one thought, is um, that you might feel that way for your next 100 auditions. So can you just get those out of the way? Like, can you audition for every community theater? Can you audition for stuff that you have no intention of acting in? Like, can you go to every open call? Can you submit to every student film? Can you just get those 100 auditions out of the way instead of making a story that because you got nervous, something is wrong with that? Maybe like you have a sensitive system, getting nervous is just like absolutely the thing that's going to happen until you've done it 100 times. And then you're like, oh yeah, I know how to be here in this space. In the same way that like just as a human, you get used to anything. Okay, so that's one piece of really concrete advice. It sounds like you're making a story that getting nervous means something about you. It doesn't have to mean anything about you. Does that make sense? The other thing that can help is learn your lines while doing something that gets your heart rate way up. Right, so run and do your lines. Do yoga and do your lines. Well, that's what I do. Right, like kickbox and do your lines. Like play tag and do your lines. Like something physical and effortful that gets your heart rate way up. Because basically what happens is everybody's looking at you, or there's pressure, whether you're putting it on yourself or other people are putting it on you. And your body starts doing this. Poof, the lines go away. Right. So again, it's back to ease, right? What gets you to ease? Either doing the thing 100 times, so that then when you do it time number 101, you're like, yeah, I know what this is. No big deal. Or preparing your body, to perform even under the conditions, where you are escalated, so that you can perform well anyway, which is what I think, a lot of athletes practice. So I've got to cut you off there, but I hope you come back next week with more questions.
Oh, yeah.
Okay. And I'm Michael Bean. This is your free lesson for myfreeactingclass.com. Come back next Monday, 5 to 6 p.m. UTC -7 for those in other parts of the world. And thank you, Donda, and Duke for your questions, and Alex for your questions, and James for your self-tape today. Bye, everybody.